education.
Join Aubrey Masango, evenings on 702.
And welcoming Sarit Zehavi, founder and president of Alma Research and Education Center in Israel. Sarit, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
I should start off by, I suppose, sending condolences. I suppose just a few days ago, you in Israel were commemorating a very, very sad day, and that is the attack that took place on the 7th of October. And I saw that there were marches of people remembering, tears and a lot of pain. So I suppose from us, condolences and to you for, I suppose, what has been a very difficult moment for you.
It's been one day of 365 sunrises and sunset over here in Israel. We all live in October 7th. We didn't wake up from the nightmare.
What happened on that day?
Us with around 3,000 terrorists, what they called Nukhba forces, invaded into Israel, into the areas next to the border of the Negev, up until 12 kilometers into Israel. And it entered to the communities next to the border. These are all small communities that everybody is like one family. One town, two towns, and there was also a party there, a music festival of 4,000 young Israelis that were dancing throughout the night. And Hamas terrorists came in order to butcher Israelis, and it had killed 1,200 Israelis that day. Almost 900 of them were civilians. About 400 were from the music festival. More than 50 children below the age of 18. In the days after, we learned that many of the women that were killed that day were raped or sexually abused, and their organs were mutilated. Hamas beheaded a children's head in front of their parents or vice versa. It burned people alive. Bodies were completely corrupted when they were found. Women were found without their underwears, sometimes tied to trees. And this is just, few pieces of the puzzle that I can tell you from all the evidence that I have heard here in the past year.
Sarit, you've just said
yes,
that you, for the last 360 days, have been experiencing over and over again a day of great sadness and horror, I suppose. Where does this conflict begin in terms of your understanding? Some people say it started 77 years ago with the occupation of Palestinian territories by the Israeli state. Some argue that this conflict started 2,000 years ago. What is your understanding of when and why this conflict has been ongoing?
What happened in October 7th has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it's a separate discussion when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had started. And I think this conversation should talk about something else. What Hamas had done is part of a religious campaign. I don't know exactly to put the finger when this specific campaign had started because, again, it depends from which point of view and what you want to include in this, who you want to include in this. I would suggest to take a look not only on the ideological motivation or the radical religious motivation, but also on the pragmatic side of it, and the fact that different radical forces joined together to create a multi-front campaign against the state of Israel. What do I mean? I mean that Iran and the Ayatollahs of Iran that came to power in 1979, to your question, marked Israel as a target, marked the destruction of Israel as a target. And what they have done specifically in the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, was to take advantage of collapsing states in the Middle East, disputes, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you like, whatever they can, in order to promote this agenda and to create a multi-front campaign against the state of Israel, meaning invasion from various fronts with various proxies into Israel. Hamas was one of them, even though Hamas is not holding exactly the same radical ideology as Iran. There are many similarities, but it's not exactly the same. Hamas are Muslim Shiites, Hamas are Muslim Sunnis, Iran are Muslim Shiites. Hamas has a national aspect in its ideology side by side with the religious aspect. Iran has much more religious aspect in its ideology. Hamas borders Israel, Iran doesn't border Israel. So there are differences. But the bottom line is that what Iran had done with Hamas itself, and in a minute we'll talk about the other arenas, was to kind of a courtship. We actually, when we followed the evolving relationship between Hamas and Iran, we saw a courtship of Iran after Hamas, bringing it on board to become part of the plan. While for Hamas itself, it was very comfortable to collaborate with Iran since it received munition and it received training and it received money in time that everybody abandoned it and it was weaker and it needed a sponsor, and Iran was there to become the sponsor of Hamas. So this is how I see, you talked about truth or narratives in your presentation. This is how I see it, and I can prove it, what I've just said.
To what extent?
I think
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
I was going to...
I think to examine what's happening through the binocular of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is narrowing the event, not only of October 7th, of the past year. I don't know if you know, but in the past year, I live up north, 9 kilometers from Lebanon. This week, we had 4 hits of rockets in my hometown, a few hundred of meters from my home. 3 homes were destroyed in this attack. And in the past year, there were, until Israel started an offensive in Lebanon in almost a month ago, we had 3,000 attacks against Israel's north by Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah claimed responsibility to these attacks. It's not an interpretation or anything. This is truth, okay? This means that more than 12,000 rockets, drones, anti-tank missiles were launched at our communities here up north since October 8. It started here in the north in October 8. And it has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is Lebanon. Hezbollah is a Lebanese organization. Hezbollah said that he came to help Gaza. But actually, if you look at how Palestinians are living in Lebanon, they have 0 rights. They have an apartheid against Palestinians in Lebanon. They don't truly care about the Palestinian cause in Lebanon.
Yeah. Let me try and perhaps ask the question this way, because your answer is quite interesting. You say that this conflict that is undergoing at the moment has actually nothing to do with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Fine. Take me to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What is that about, from your perspective?
So here I agree with your opening that you can look at that in different ways, and there are different versions, okay? Because On the one hand, there is a religious aspect in this conflict which we cannot ignore. Okay? And I'll give you an example. My grandmother was born in Hebron, which is one of the biggest cities in West Bank. Clearly before the establishment of the State of Israel. It's my grandmother. Okay? In 1929, there was a massacre in Hebron. That's before the establishment of the State of Israel. My grandmother was a 7-year-old child. And at that night, Arabs massacred Jews just the same way as Hamas massacred the Israelis in October 7th. And my grandmother's life were rescued by a Muslim family. They were their neighbors. But the next day she was expelled by the British, who were the rulers here. And a family could never go back to Hebron. So am I a Palestinian? Am I a Palestinian refugee? How come they are not Palestinian Jews? How come when we speak about the two-state solution, we always say that Israel needs to evacuate the settlements? If we have peace, how come Jews cannot live there the same way they live as a minority in any other place in the world? I think the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is more than just a division of land. And it's more than just a conflict between two people. It was brutalized in public opinion during the years to create something that today I truly don't know how we are going to solve. But again, I didn't come to a conversation with you to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because I think this is not the issue. And I live here up north under the fire, the daily fire of Hezbollah, because this is not the issue. In your opening, you wanted to understand what's happening in the Middle East. Are we in a regional war, or are we going to deteriorate to a regional war? I think we are already in a regional war.
Yeah. So
I think that Iran made a decision to deteriorate the region into a regional war.
Yeah. Let me just contextualize the reason why there needs to be, at least from where we are, in the southern tip of the African continent, that the conversation about the conflict that is taking place in that part of the world has been characterized as a form of apartheid. We here know all too well what apartheid is and what it did. And, and ultimately, apartheid was a phase of the colonialization of the land of African people by European powers. And that created all sorts of inequality and all sorts of things. And generally, the world understands what's going on right now as a similar conflict to what we here in South Africa have experienced. And that the people of Palestine, if that narrative is true, are rightfully fighting for what belongs to them. Now, you tell the story of your grandmother, who was born living in, is it Hanaf?
She was born in the West Bank.
Yeah. And
it's part of a Jewish community in the West Bank that was there for centuries.
Yeah. So the question I'm asking is, the rest of the world is understanding this conflict very much to be part of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. You are saying that there's more to this, and that is more of a religious conflict. To what end?
No. Yeah. I'm not saying that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a religious conflict. I'm saying that there is a religious component in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I am saying that the current war in the Middle East around Israel's borders has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And I am saying it's religious.
That the current war that we experience now is a religious conflict that was initiated by Iran, financed by Iran. Okay. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias of Iraq, the militias in Syria, they were all trained and equipped by the Ayatollahs of Iran, by the IRGC. And this is the war that we are now experiencing.
And to what end? What is the clarion call for Iran? Why is there such a religious war?
Okay, so I will say a few things to answer your question. First, the Islamic Revolution values is all about the superiority of the supreme leader. The supreme leader is the one who is the highest cleric, and everybody should be completely loyal to him. There is no democracy in this. And he's the one who is making all the decisions according to the law of God. The main principle around that is that this idea should be distributed, should be spread around the world. The whole world, eventually, due to this vision, should follow the radical interpretation of the Shiite Islam of the Ayatollahs of Iran. This means that Hezbollah was established in order to distribute the Islamic Revolution values of Iran. This means that the reason that Iran is supporting the Sunni Hamas, that by Iran Sunnis are considered infidels, okay? There is no ideological base to support them. But Iran is supporting them because it serves the cause. It may help them to distribute the Islamic Revolution and to strengthen their power in the Middle East. This means that Iran established proxies in various places in the Middle East. Houthis are a good example, militias in Iraq are a good example, and in Syria, to distribute the Islamic Revolution values in those places. And Syria is a good example because you see the establishment of Shiite mosques instead of Sunni mosques in areas that became empty following the civil war in Syria. Now, where Israel fits into all of that? Part of this ideology says the Jews cannot control the third holy city to Islam. That's one thing. And second, due to the Ayatollah's ideology, as you described it, Israel is a colonial power, that a foreign power, if you like, that brought to the Middle East foreign values of the West, which needs to be taken out of the Middle East, including values of democracy, recognizing LGBTQ rights, women's rights, freedom of speech. All of that are values that Iran and its proxies in the Middle East do not believe in. So for them, it was an excellent mobilizer to use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in order to mobilize the young people with spices, as a metaphor of the issue of Jerusalem as the third holy city in Islam. All of that together, and you get a recipe for hate to Israel that was. And again, I can prove it. We are on the radio, but I have tons of visuals that can prove it. That convince their followers that Israel should be destroyed and that Jews cannot have the control over Jerusalem. And in many, many speeches, Iranian players, the leaders of Hezbollah, said, we offer these Jews that came from Europe. They believe we came from Europe, even though more than half of the Jews in Israel came from Middle Eastern countries. And we suggested Jews to pack their suitcases and go back to Europe. Okay, this is the ideology that we're talking about. That's the point of view that we're talking about. Hamas adopted something very similar from a different point of view. I know it's complicated and I know it's too many details, which is the radical Sunni Islam. that also involves the destruction of the State of Israel, the destruction of Western values, the distribution of radical interpretation of Islam elsewhere in the world, except radical Sunnis and radical Shiites view each other as enemies. How come they collaborate now? Because each of them found it beneficial and effective to join forces to kill Israelis and to try to destroy the State of Israel. Once they will succeed, I believe they will not, but once they will succeed, they will either fight each other or come to fight you. I don't know.
Let me
That's basically what I'm saying. Now, I just want to say, I know it sounds apocalyptic. I know it sounds crazy. I know how it sounds to your ears. But what I'm saying is translation from Persian and Arabic of things that our enemies are saying themselves. I am not interpreting what they are saying. I'm quoting what I'm saying.
Right. So the 7th of October happens, and many people will argue that Israel, like any state, has a right to defend itself, whatever the reasons are for the attack on Israeli citizens, especially if we hear that more than 1,200 people died on that particular day. But I suppose the big issue is the intensity with which Israel responded. We are told now that the number of dead people in this conflict is now at 46,000, give or take. The majority of those people who have died are mainly Gazans. And it appears that now we are seeing that number increase going into Lebanon. And the world perhaps is looking at Israel and saying that whatever the reasons are, because it appears that both sides have reasons for the conflict, which they all say that they can prove, right? But the issue now is that we have this number of fatalities, many of them, as we understand, inflicted by the Israeli army. 46,000. Is there nothing to be said about the intensity of the retaliation if indeed we start on that day, the 7th, or let's say the 8th of October? Is there nothing to be said about the fact that this number needs to be talked about, and Israel needs to take some sort of accountability for all of these deaths? We've seen pictures of babies, hospitals, and so forth, people dying. To what extent, from your perspective, should Israel take some sort of responsibility?
There is a lot to say about what you just said, because what you just said is a title. Let's summarize it for a moment in one sentence, okay, with your permission.
Sure.
Israeli retaliation to October 7th brought to 40,000 casualties in Gaza. Is this what you just said?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that it's not what I said, but I think it is a fair paraphrasal of what I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So now I want to put details into this, and I also want to contradict the use of the word retaliation. What we had done in Gaza was not a retaliation. It was not revenge. It was prevention of the next massacre. Okay? That's one thing. Second, we set the conditions very, very clear that we will lay our arms down the moment that Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, will lay its arm down and release our hostages. There are still 101 Israeli hostages in Gaza. Red Cross didn't get to visit them. We don't know what's their condition. A few weeks ago it was 117, but 6 hostages were executed with bullets to their heads deep in Hamas tunnels, and IDF found them 24, 48 hours later. Within these hostages, the majority are civilians, 2 children, people which are elderlies above the age of 60, and Hamas refused to release them. And Hamas is saying, we will release the hostages only when Israel will completely withdraw from Gaza, and basically what it is saying, and we will be able to control Gaza again. What does that mean for Israelis after the massacre of October 7th? It means that Hamas, again, a terrorist organization, it's not a state, is trying to recover in order to carry out another October 7th. And Israel must make sure that this is not happening again. This is the only reason why we continue to fight.
Some people, Sarit.
Now, wait,
Okay.
I want to talk about the 40,000,
Yep.
because you talked about 40,000.
Yeah.
And I want to say a few things. For us Israelis, it took a few months. So I will be able to come up with the numbers and tell you that we had 1,200 casualties in October 7th. The situation was so chaotic that it was really difficult to count the bodies and understand how many people were killed. The data that is coming out of Gaza is really weird because it's a terrorist organization that reports the numbers, and sometimes it is reporting numbers like few seconds after an attack, and nobody doubts the numbers. One more question. Out of the 40,000, how many are terrorists? Due to the IDF recordings, about a half, about 17,000 terrorists, maybe even more to this day. I'm talking about numbers that were published like a month ago. Are Hamas terrorists, which were fighting against our forces. So I understand it's a lot of blood that was spilled. I totally understand it. I feel the pain. I don't ignore the pain. But we cannot ignore the details as well.
Sure.
And behind these details stands one last sentence,
Yeah.
is the fact that Hamas, and you mentioned hospitals rightfully, Hamas is using its own people as human shields. IDF entered to the hospitals because inside or under these hospitals there were weapons caches and headquarters of Hamas. We have no business in entering into hospitals. This is complicated enough. Why would we do that unless there is terrorist activity over there? We had no business in entering Gaza. We avoided entering Gaza for so many years and enabled Hamas to dig all these tunnels, taking the risk of this massacre because we didn't want to see civilian casualties in Gaza and our soldiers getting killed there as well. We didn't want all of that.
Sure.
And
So-
we had done that because we didn't have a choice.
Sure.
And the player that has to be held accountable to that tragic situation of death of that many Gazians is Hamas itself. Since the tunnels that Hamas had excavated in Gaza are safe, right? IDF had to get in order to destroy the tunnels. How come there is no one Gazian civilian that is hiding in these tunnels? How come the civilians are above the ground and Hamas terrorists
Yeah.
are below the ground?
Let
It
me
should
ask-
be the opposite.
Let me ask you this question, Sarit, based on your account of the facts as you put them. You say that, can I call it a war? what is the right term?
It is war, of
Right,
course.
okay.
It is war.
So you say that the war is not a retaliation but a prevention of a massacre.
This war was initiated by Hamas, not by Israel in October 7th.
I'm not arguing that. I'm saying that
Okay.
you are saying that the war is a prevention of a massacre that has not yet happened before. I mean, that has not happened yet.
I am saying that Hamas, right after October 7th, said that it is willing to do more October 7th. The leaders of Hamas were interviewed and said that.
Okay. So
Israel had to make sure that they are incapable of doing that again.
okay.
That's very clear, I think, for every nation in the world.
Some may argue that you are preventing a massacre by creating a massacre.
Okay, so I'm saying again, they can argue, fine. But eventually, the 40,000 Gazians that were killed, about half of them are terrorists. So it's not a massacre, clearly, okay? And the other half were killed since Hamas is using them as human shields. Hamas is hiding its munition, its tunnel shafts, its rockets that are, by the way, being launched, including this week, to Tel Aviv from Gaza. All of this is hidden inside the homes and under the homes of the Gazians, and it's the same. You mentioned Lebanon rightfully. It's the same situation in Lebanon.
So
I understand the high price. I totally understand. But what's the option? The other option is that Israel will leave the hostages buried there, enable Hamas to recover, and suffer another massacre? This is not an option. I'm sorry.
I'm asking, I suppose, the logic of the prevention narrative. That if we agree, and maybe there's margins for disagreement in all of this, because you've pointed out that even that number, 40,000, is questionable because it comes from questionable sources. But, you know, we've seen journalists who have been reporting from various positions in Gaza corroborate some of these numbers. We've seen the fact that even the IDF is not necessarily disputing these numbers. The question I'm asking is, if this is a prevention of something, is the prevention of that thing by creating a massacre too? Because if we agree that...
But I think the disagreement between us is that I don't define the death of 40,000, assuming this is the number, okay, whatever. The deaths of thousands of Gazians, I don't define it a massacre because we didn't massacre anybody. We have no intentions to massacre anybody. And the massacres are the Hamas terrorists that are using their own people as human shields. They are the massacres. If we want to bring prosperity to Gaza, by the way, Israel had withdrawn from Gaza in 2005. We took our deads from the graves to leave Gaza for Palestinians. We took all 8,000 Jews that used to live there out, including those who were buried there, and we left their warehouses and irrigation systems, and we were willing to collaborate in different kind of agricultural projects and merchandise and border crossings, and there was a collaboration with the EU around that and with the Egyptians. We wanted peace with the Gazians when we had left Gaza, and they chose war. They voted for Hamas in elections, the only elections that they had since then. And they chose war.
Explain to me, please.
So what I'm saying is that to complete the sentence, that once Hamas will be out of Gaza, there is a chance that Gaza will be prospering.
And I suppose Hamas is saying
Hamas
exactly the same thing about Israel, to say that once Israel is out of the region, then there'll be peace and prosperity. So I mean, it's a point of argument. What I'm trying to understand though is,
look, I must tell you something.
Yeah.
What you are doing now. It's a conversation for another Zoom. We can have another Zoom. You are questioning my very existence here.
no, I'm not.
Even though
I'm not. I'm not.
What
I'm
you're
trying to
doing.
get clarity. Please listen to my question. Listen to my question.
I am not saying that we should take the Gazians out of Gaza. I didn't say that.
Yeah, but
I say we should.
But
take
listen to my
Hamas, who is the
listen to my
terrorist organization,
sorry. Listen to my
out of Gaza.
listen to my question, right? Because you're answering something else, and that's not my question. My question is, if we agree that there are 40,000 people that have died in this conflict.
No, we don't agree. But
Okay.
okay.
But okay, I'm happy to work with the but okay, right? Who has killed these people?
Is responsible to their death because it is using them as human shields.
So
This is my answer to you. IDF
no.
do not target
You're not
civilians.
answering my question, Sarit, again, but respectfully. You're telling me about who is responsible, and that sounds like a political answer. I'm simply asking who killed the 46,000 people.
Now,
The give or
what
take.
you're doing now
Yes.
is taking two sentences out of context, and I'm not willing to collaborate with that, because if you want to have a podcast that gets into the details and bring your followers.
Hello, Sarit?
Okay, we should get into the details, and the details.
I'm happy
are
to get into
that
the
Israel
details.
The details are that Israel is literally feeding the Gazians that massacred and the children that spit on the dead bodies of our raped women when they were brought to Gaza.
Sure. I'm not
There are
disputing
pictures
that.
of that. There are videos of that.
I'm not disputing
Wait.
that. I'm not
Okay,
disputing that.
So
but
if
you
you're
haven't
not
answered
disputing that,
my
let
question.
me tell the full story. No, because it does matter. It does matter.
Of course it matters, but I have a question that has not been answered yet.
What do you want to know? These
want to
people
know-
were killed from Hamas.
No.
Some of these
Listen
people
to my
were
question
killed
and then
by
answer.
Hamas bombs.
Just listen
Some
to
of
my
these people
question,
were
Sarit.
killed by Hamas bombs, and some of these people were killed by IDF bombs. The reason they were killed by IDF bombs is because Hamas put them in front of the terrorists as the human shield of the terrorists. No, not because somebody targeted them.
All right, let's move on because
Let's
let's move on because the question has been preempted because there was a specific question I wanted to ask, but clearly that question is not up for the conversation for this evening, and I'm happy to have another conversation. What happens now? There are clear demands from both sides that say the other side must disappear in order for there to be peace. What happens now?
Again, I cannot accept your symmetry because we are not saying that the Gazians should disappear. Nobody is saying that here. Okay? We are saying that the terrorist organization that took over Gaza, named Hamas, should disappear for the benefit of the Gazians and the Israelis alike. This is a huge difference. While Hamas is saying Israelis should disappear.
All right, so
Hamas is not the legitimate government of Gaza.
You do realize though that it is a similar argument from the other side that says the current government of Israel is not the legitimate representative of all Israelis. And
but Hamas is not saying that. This was never said by Hamas. Hamas is saying that Israelis are illegitimate, not the government of Israel.
all right. So what about the other side, Hezbollah, and what of them? Is that part of the conversation to say that they too need to be removed before there can be a letting of tensions?
Okay, so let's talk about Hezbollah. I am the head of a research and education center that focuses on Israel's security challenges on the northern borders. And before October 7th, we published many articles. You can check our website. And we said that Hezbollah, again, a terrorist organization, it's not the legitimate government of the state of Lebanon. It's a terrorist organization that is also a political party in Lebanon and also a social movement in Lebanon that has an army which is stronger than the Lebanese army that gets the orders from Iran. Okay? Now, this Hezbollah was preparing for war, was preparing for an invasion to Israel and massacring Israelis just like Hamas had done in October 7. How do I know? Because 10 years ago, Hezbollah published a video under the title, The Occupation of the Galilee, or the Conquering of the Galilee. Galilee is the northern part of Israel where I live. And a video that described the maneuver of Hezbollah military operatives crossing the border into the Galilee. And what you see in the video is step by step exactly what Hamas had done in Gaza. The same principles of starting from a barrage of rockets, of taking hostages to become human shields, of going to the communities to take over the communities. All the principles that you saw happening in October 7th by Hamas existed in a Hezbollah propaganda video from 10 years ago, which none of us, by the way, in the security agencies of Israel believed that Hezbollah will ever actually execute. Then we saw, and I saw myself, when I was on the border every day, I saw them on the border every day. They were spying on us. They were taking photos of us. They were building watching towers. Again, it's not the official army of Lebanon. They were taking photos. They were taking pictures. They were threatening us. They launched terrorists to infiltrate. They launched anti-tank missiles. They sent Hamas operatives in Lebanon to launch rockets to Israel last Passover. And the border became very, very tense until in October 8th, Hezbollah opened fire against Israel, and his leader said, as long as there is no ceasefire in Gaza, there is no ceasefire in Lebanon, and drag Israel and Lebanon into war that has nothing to do with any interest of the Lebanese. There are many Lebanese that are totally against this war that Hezbollah initiated against Israel. Taking you through, I'm not going to get to all these details because we don't have time, but taking you through to what is happening now. After a year that we have 60,000 Israelis that are displaced, that cannot go back to their homes, that many of their homes don't exist anymore because Hezbollah bombed them directly with accurate anti-tank weapons against homes, okay? 60,000 Israelis are displaced. 200,000 Israelis more are under constant fire of Hezbollah, like myself, as I told you. We had hits in homes here, where Hezbollah claimed responsibility that it is shooting to the communities, not only to IDF bases.
So
IDF decided enough is the Israeli government decided that enough is enough. We will move from defensive to offensive, and there is now an IDF maneuver in Lebanon. And guess what? In this maneuver, again, like in Gaza, in every home, IDF finds munitions, not just rifles. Munitions that are gear that meant to equip an army for an invasion.
okay, Sarit, we've run out of time.
For me to look at that, I don't sleep at night. I don't sleep at night worrying that I only started to sleep once IDF entered into Lebanon, to tell you the truth, because I was worried that I would find a terrorist in my living room. As simple as that.
So ultimately, it appears that there is no end in sight to this conflict.
Ultimately, as long as we are facing, unfortunately, I wish I won't be able to say to you, because, you know, we are all either brothers or wives or parents to soldiers. We want peace. This is our DNA, because we don't want to send our dearest to fight. We cherish life. And what I see is that I am facing the opposite ideology. I am facing an ideology of death. From their own mouth, they are saying that. Okay?
Okay.
I am facing an ideology
Sarit,
that said that we should disappear.
Yeah.
So I don't see a solution. To tell you the truth, I don't see a solution.
Sarit,
What
Zehavi,
I do see is answers.
Yeah. Sarit Zehavi, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. Sarit is founder and president of Alma Research and Education Center in Israel.